What's up, COD fans? Welcome back. Big news today. 4v4 is going to be back for the Cold War season. This is going to mean chaos in a multitude of ways. And I'm going to do my best to kind of break this down in a couple of different segments as far as my thoughts on the issue and what this might mean going forward. So let's start with the number one thing. Current rosters in the CDL. Yes, this means that current CDL rosters are going to have to make some changes, some probably more than others, and with that is going to mean a lot of headaches for some of these squads. But in reality, what does this actually mean for roster mania in its majority? Is it actually going to be a discussion of who do we drop to get down to 4? I think no. For me, this roster mania period for the majority of teams that are out there is going to be just like last year. The whole let's build a brand new team mentality. The only teams that I think are going to be exempt from that and will have to make some very trepidatious decisions are squads like Dallas, Atlanta, Chicago. Really, because you're looking at 3 teams that arguably hold more than 10 of the top current 15 COD players. You're mostly going to be facing the discussion then of who do you drop? And I don't know how you do that, especially for Dallas, who just won a world championship. But for everybody else, this is likely going to be a let's build a new roster and try again type cause and effect with this going from 5v5 to 4v4. And honestly, that's great news for teams like Seattle and the Los Angeles Guerrillas. Clean the slate, start all over as if Season 1 never even happened. But you have to also, with that same thing in mind, remember why teams like the Los Angeles Guerrillas and even squads like Paris and Toronto were looked down upon in the first place for the CDL season number 1. They filled their rosters poorly. And in a world where, like I said, 10 of the top 15 players in COD will be likely soaked up between 3 or 4 different teams, you're still going to be running into that same gamble type system where you're hoping you find the lucky recipe to do something like what Toronto was able to do by the end of the year. Granted, they had a lot more options to play with having a 10-man roster. So, in short, what does this all mean in full? Hold on to your butts. We are going to be doing the 19 to 20 year all over again when it comes to roster mania. And it's not even worth the conversation in my mind of who do you drop from each of the teams? Because again, like I mentioned, for 8 of the 12 teams that we listed, they're likely going to be full roster swaps with maybe only investing into a single player. Everybody else likely going to be dismantled, completely changed going into the Cold War year. The second thing I want to keep in mind is the longevity of what the CDL will look like if we go to 4v4. My simple way of putting it, this is it. It has to be it. No more changing. It has to be 4v4 from here on out. The one thing that I find is probably one of the more difficult things about the majority of esports that are out there is recognition of a team, its brand, and its players. If someone tuned in to finals this last weekend, in which 330,000 plus people did, and they're going around, and let's say that that was the first time they watched the CDL this year, truly, and they walked away a fan of, let's say, the Dallas Empire. But then they don't tune into the Call of Duty scene again until day 1 of Season 2. Let's be honest, that's a pretty big majority of people that are out there. I know if you're watching this video, you're probably somebody who caught the news and is wanting to know more, and likely you're already in tune of what's going on. But for a lot of the viewership that comes through, that very well could have been their first time watching professional Call of Duty this last weekend. So, you keep that in mind, they build an identity, but now you go into day 1 of Season 2, and you see a completely new team, whether it is for Dallas, just hypothetically, or for a team that Dallas is playing up against. Completely brand new. It could be a major turnoff, or if you will, a colossal what the fuck moment. If the CDL wants to move forward, it needs to be marketable. It needs to have a palatable sense of recognition. And in that, if the teams want to see profits, they need to be able to build their franchise around different players' stories or identities. This includes things like merchandise, but also any type of content that teams are trying to put out. YouTube features, AMAs, literally any piece of content you can think of that we saw this last year from teams like Chicago and Dallas especially. If they don't have a team or a player to build those stories off of, it can be very difficult to bring brand recognizability into the CDL, whether it's just the league in full, or if, especially, I think, again, where the league would find its success, is being able to make sure that your team's brands are still finding a way to be recognizable. That very well might not be the case going into next year. The league and its teams cannot afford to do another major roster mania like this, where every single team is going to be different from one year to the next. It becomes way too hard on fans, whether it's specific team fans or the audience at large, to follow along with. So, if this is 4v4 next year, which we confirmed from the Call of Duty League Twitter that it needs to be 4v4 from here on out forever. We cannot afford to do another one of these major roster manias where you're going into another season where every single team is going to be different from the year before. That was the big concern for a lot of people going into this year, wasn't it? The fact that, well, what am I going to do without the United team? I like the United. I want to see those 5 guys back again. That was the big conversation. Old optic versus new optic. That same thing that kind of persisted throughout the entirety of the year. Those storylines are good for Call of Duty. If we're continuing to go into now old Minnesota versus new Minnesota, what are we really doing? The third and final thing I want to talk about with you guys are expansions, or rather, the lack of. ESPN Esports earlier today reported that league sources have confirmed that there will be no expansion teams in the CDL throughout the 2021 year, essentially saying that, by quote, both the league and team owners hope to showcase their original business plans, particularly the popularity of offline events in the city-based league, before looking to recruit franchise buyers for a higher sum. So let's talk to me like I'm 5. What does that mean? You have to remember that all of this comes following the pivot of what was the original design for the 2020 Modern Warfare year due to the coronavirus pandemic, which, as we know, shifted everything that was supposed to be an offline home series event into an online system. But with no true end in sight for COVID, rumors at the current moment are that the 2021 season will exist largely online with a potential of maybe 2 offline events. That speculatively would be something like an opening launch weekend and maybe something like playoffs or a mid-season invitational of sorts. So this whole statement, I think, tells us a lot. The first of which is that they want to get 2021 back to a world that looks more like what the original business plan was. Be able to show new buyers what this league is supposed to be like, not necessarily what it was in this last year, although last year it did end up in a very successful way. But also the thing that sticks out in my mind is the fact that they're looking for teams to invest in higher sums. So the whole idea is, yeah, we could very well add more teams at the $25 million spot, but profitably and more financially, you want to be able to get those teams to want to invest for more. So that's the whole idea. You essentially think about 2021 as another proving year as far as what the CDL looks like, and it also gives an opportunity for the CDL to help out those initial 12 teams to get themselves more established. You don't find yourself in an Overwatch League situation where you're all of a sudden having to panic invest into 6 new teams at a higher price cost from China in order to make sure that your league is still profitable. So there's that to also keep in mind. But here's the other point of it when it comes to a different talking point. What happens to the CDL when you strike 20% of the CDL spots for players specifically? With no expansions, it means that we're going to be losing not just 12 players, which would be 1 from each team, but it will also likely mean that the minimum number of players on a roster will go from 7 to 6. So in reality, you're actually looking at a minimum of losing 24 current CDL salaried players to the Challengers division, and honestly probably more than the 24 because there's no way that Toronto holds on to 10 players going into next year. So what we need to do to look at the lack of expansions and what that will mean for the players specifically is actually take a look at the Challengers division more closely. And as that is a whole different topic in itself, we will save it for a whole different video as well. My final point, though, I think on the expansions not coming into this next year is that it's going to suck for the players, but I think overall it's going to be positive for the league. You get another chance to essentially make sure that you're good to go, whether online stays for longer than you want it to, or you can build up a system in which the offline world can look at what you did in your first 4 opening weekends and then sit there and say, okay, was this successful? Do we have to change how we're running offline events for these home series? And what can we do to make sure that these 12 teams are finding success? So that way your 13th through 16th or more beyond that teams are also going to be able to just be immediately entered into the league and find those same senses of success. So like I mentioned, we will be talking more about the Challengers division more closely, but we'll be doing that in an entirely different video. At the moment, I plan on having a number of very well-versed personalities to talk over the Challenger scene, and I will likely hold the conversation in podcast form on my Twitch channel sometime this week. So make sure you follow me on Twitter to know when we're going to do that and who will be joining me. Beyond that, I will also likely be summing up that conversation, taking clips, and putting it into a more direct YouTube video in itself. So make sure if you're looking to stay tuned with everything going on with Call of Duty Rostermania, the Challenger scene, or just Call of Duty in whole, make sure you subscribe right here to the channel. Been a pleasure being back with you guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. And until the next one, hope you guys keep holding it down. Later. Bye-bye.